You are now listening to the Here for the Truth podcast, hosted by Joel Rafidi and Yerasimos Stilianessis. All right, guys, episode 48 of Here for the Truth podcast. I'm Joel Rafidi. As always, I've got my co-host Yerasimos Stilianessis. He's coming live from California. I'm in Sydney, Australia. It's great to be here with you all. Housekeeping before we get into our episode today with Laura Matsue. We're working on a website and it's getting super close, and we're super pumped to create this platform for you guys. It's looking really good. All our content's going to be accessible in one place. We're going to be free from censorship there ultimately. And we got a merch store coming as well with some awesome t-shirts, awesome mugs, and just different ways to involve the community. As always, if you're looking for some divination needs, my services are all based around helping you embody your individuality and provide you with self-knowledge through various tools, arts, plus my own work. You can head to joelrafidi.com and check that out. I currently have an offer on the alchemy reading. If you join my Telegram group, which is also at Joel Rafidi, and use the code Telegram20, you get $20 off the alchemy reading. If you're looking for specific human design readings, please reach out to Yerasimos, or if you're in the LA area and in need of some body work or breath work, also reach out to Yerasimos. And without further ado, let's bring on Laura Matsue. All right, everybody, good to be with you here once again. Welcome to episode 48 of Here for the Truth. And we have an amazing guest with you for you today, Laura Matsue, wife of Bernard Gonta, who joined us on episode 26. It's such a pleasure to have her here. Let me introduce Laura quickly from her bio. Laura's studied a wide range of modalities, ranging between Western psychology and Eastern spirituality. She's a teacher of yoga, meditation, a psychospiritual coach, and an astrologer. She's studied various spiritual and psychotherapeutic modalities, including compassionate inquiry, internal family systems, Tibetan Buddhism, evolutionary astrology, somatic psychology, and is a big fan of combining depth psychology with esoteric spirituality. From 2012 forward, she began her journey of regenerating her body, mind, and spirit through committing to a daily yoga and meditation practice, accompanied by psychological self-work and working with various healing modalities. And now she works with many of these modalities she used to heal herself on others who are looking to heal themselves as well. Laura is known in her coaching for being able to give people a clear overview of their karmic situation in this lifetime, and works with the method of evolutionary astrology in particular to do this. She's the co-host of the Cosmic Matrix podcast with her husband, Bernard. They currently facilitate the Embodied Soul Awakening group program, where they guide people through an in-depth program of holistic self-work together. Laura, welcome to Here for the Truth.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Glad to finally chat with you guys off the interwebs.
No, for sure. Definitely good to connect.
Yeah, it's important. So as always, we'd like to begin this with your personal rites of passages, your hero's journey. What were the milestones that you went through to, I guess, really begin to awaken into who you are today?
Yeah, so I guess for me, the turning point was 2012. In my teens to my late 20s, I was working as a music journalist in the entertainment industry, and really just looking for ways to express my creativity through that. And I got exposed to a lot of dark and traumatic experience, kind of navigating these upper echelons of power, I guess you could say. And that led me to, I guess, even like a decade-long dark night of the soul, just becoming addicted to various drugs, then going to help through the mainstream medical system, them having me they put me on a bunch of psychiatric drugs, and then that's when I realized like the healing I was looking for was not to be found in the existing systems. So yeah, it had to get really, really bad for me. I really got pushed to the brink of suicide in late 2012, actually. And I had a turning point where I hit complete rock bottom. I had just gone on a detox. for opiates, actually. So that was really intense physically, and psychiatric drugs. And I had a turning point where I had nothing left to do but turn to God. And it was actually around the end of the world calendar in the Mayan calendar, December 2012, where that was the first moment I prayed, and God kind of gave me a hand. And through a series of synchronicities, I was able to kind of climb out of an extremely dark place and learned how to just heal myself in mind, body, and spirit. And from that point forward, I just started a daily yoga and meditation practice. I really found deep magic in this kind of spiritual approach, which led to me a lot of spiritual bypassing as well. And that's when I started exploring psychotherapeutic modalities, but more adept psychology, especially Carl Jung's work, and just really exploring, the shadows that led me to where I had been through. And yeah, it's just been an ongoing journey since then. I did my yoga teacher training. I did holistic counseling. I studied all these somatic therapeutic modalities, mostly just looking for deeper healing on myself. And then I moved to an eco village because I was convinced the world was going to end a few years before it actually shit actually hit the fan. And then I met Bernhard, and then we started doing retreats in Peru together. Then all of this kind of craziness hit. We moved our work entirely online, and that's basically leading to where I am right now. And we just facilitate now groups through this time of transition, because we can see that people are really struggling right now. I mean, we work with pretty big groups of people, and a lot of people are now going through similar renditions of kind of what I went through for the last decade. So we're just guiding people through that process, and it's really profound and intense, and it's really what we're here for.
Besides like yoga and meditation, in terms of like when you're working in these group settings, what are the main things that you utilize with your clients in these group programs?
Yeah, so definitely I think a foundation of basic Jungian psychology, like understanding shadow work, understanding projection, is really key. Getting people to work with their triggers in a somatic way, process them. We also work with a modality called IFS, Internal Family Systems Therapy, which basically works with different subpersonalities that we all have, and teaches people to identify the difference between their subpersonalities and their true self. So it's really a holistic, integrative approach. And Bernhard really goes into the occult, the matrix control system as well, and the more esoteric spiritual side of it. So, I mean, we do everything. We really try and get people on a consistent spiritual practice, and then we lead them through psychological inner work while they're kind of anchoring these higher frequencies. So yeah, I hope that answers your question. It's really multi-pronged. It's a pretty in-depth program.
No, I love it. I mean, I love getting into all this stuff and geeking out on it. Something that had a huge impact on my life. Like 15 years ago, one of my first acting teachers was trained in something called voice dialogue, the psychology of the selves and the aware ego, and it was all about interviewing different parts of your psyche, and they called them subpersonalities, and seeing what you over-identified with and what you were repressing, and just hearing the voice of these other parts of us that maybe have been repressed or undeveloped. So I'm a huge fan. People have told me about IFS. I haven't delved into it, but it sounds pretty awesome and cool and powerful.
Yeah, it's just one methodology. I find it really goes well with contemplative practices, because when you're meditating, sometimes, since we don't really have these, like, not everyone wants to become a Buddhist or Hinduist or go into these kind of spiritual traditions. So I found when I was meditating, I was like, okay, but what is the true self, and learning different ways to identify, true nature versus the parts of ourselves, which is not true nature, can kind of help you nudge you in the right direction. Because when you meditate, I find that you open up a whole bunch of stuff if you're doing it in an embodied way. And so you have to kind of know what you're trying to orient towards. Otherwise, you can easily kind of go down the wrong path, I guess you could say. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, how do you meditate in an embodied way? I mean, meditation, I know sounds very different for everybody, and it's experienced differently for everybody as well. Yeah, I'd like to just know on a basic level from your perspective, the process of meditation.
Yeah. Well, I learned the kind of meditation I practice from a teacher called Reggie Ray, who was taught by Chongyin Trungpa, who's pretty infamous in the Tibetan Buddhist lineage. And he really focuses a lot on just kind of staying in the body, specifically in the yin space, which is the lower belly. So doing lots of like lower belly breathing, body scanning. I mean, just generally speaking, just staying in your body with awareness, feeling whatever it is you're feeling, and allowing those feelings to be processed to completion is my general philosophy. So you can find that in many different meditative traditions. For some people, actually, the form of meditation that I practice would not necessarily work with them because their mind is too active, in which case maybe even working with a mantra or some sort of, something to keep their mind busy is better. But I find that meditation, the point of meditation is just to arrive into your human experience, basically. And a lot of us basically hold a backlog of unprocessed emotions and experiences in the body, actually. Yeah. So, when I've gone deep on like meditative retreats, I've unlocked even ancestral traumas that were held in my body and all sorts of stuff that I didn't consciously remember until I went deep. So I really feel like, the Buddha said it himself, the body is really the gateway to an enlightened experience, basically. So you can do that any way you like, but I find this kind of like astral projecting out of body kind of stuff won't help you arrive to that human experience, if that makes sense.
Oh yeah, it makes complete sense. I mean, I'm a body worker by trade as well, and whatever I can do to help people get more in touch with their body. And I feel like sometimes meditations is used. You brought up the term spiritual bypass before. Sometimes it's used as a form of spiritual bypassing, to not
Yes.
even to disconnect, to dissociate from the body. So, you're speaking my language. You hit the nail on the head in terms of like when you think about a process of enlightenment, it's like how can we have that human experience, and how can we notice what's going on moment to moment and have that relationship with our soma. It's just so freaking important, I
Yes.
find.
Yeah, and it also goes the opposite of how the world operates, right? It's like a very left brain dominated world where we're kind of meant to override our body for the sake of whatever it is our left brain is telling us to do. So you really learn to kind of reverse the way that you operate within the world, which is like it's a game changer, and then you have to adjust to being in the world in a different way. So there's so many subtle dimensions of experience, and I'm still trying now. Now is the hardest time to stay embodied because of the intensity of the energies we're dealing with, the shift of consciousness, the transformation, but I think that's really, if you think about the kind of the bigger agenda that's going on, it's really to dislodge the soul from the body. And that's been happening through, not just whatever the jab going on, but pharmaceuticals, mainstream medicine, just this kind of like disassociative culture we have where we're just stuck on our phones and just kind of focused on information, so yeah, like it's really intense to actually be in the body. That's the kind of like crux of the situation, because we have to be present with our human experience, which I think for a lot of people is a lot right now, which is why they're getting kind of trapped in information overload and like looking for saviors and whatnot, but it really comes down to like, can we stay with our soul in our body through these intense experiences, and really anchor something higher as well. Like I personally feel since 2020, there's been also collective, even probably before then, there's an immense amount of spiritualization that wants to anchor itself down into people, for people who have cleared the channels to receive it. So even though we're kind of getting dragged down to the depths of like, the shadows of humanity are all getting revealed, there's also there is a collective awakening happening as well, and has been going on for at least a decade now, at least since I've been part of it.
Yeah, absolutely. My path really changed more than anything when I began to incorporate the soma, in a really profound way. And what I discovered was that, the culture gives us so many gateways to escape the body. And it also gives us so many opportunities to create circumstances and issues within ourselves where we don't want to be in the body. through the malignant culture, be it, you mean the constant violence that we're exposed to, porn culture, all these different things where we feel as though it's too difficult to actually face our shadows and actually deal with what we've culminated and created for ourselves over the course of our lives. And we hear about shadow work so often, but for me, what changed the game for me was understanding the body as the shadow, and the body holding the shadow and holding all those repressions. And yeah, for me, meditation doesn't really work for me. Maybe I do have more of an active mind, but what I found was qigong and tai chi, and something where I can involve my body a bit more, allow me to really hone in and feel what my body needed to feel during those times. So yeah, that was super important. And yeah, you're right. I mean, as we deal with these shadows, as we move through it, we create space, and we create space for ourselves as well, right? Because I think what we're seeing more than anything is this epidemic of inauthenticity at the moment. And that's because people, they're not actually holding space for themselves within their own vessels, but as they begin to work through those shadows, and there's more space for them to fill that void, you know? And yeah, just wanted to throw that in there.
Yeah, and I think also what people are struggling with is if you look at it from evolutionary astrology, Aquarius, 11th house, Uranus, this is about the individuation process. And this is the house and sign before Pisces, before the sign where we return to the everything, the all. And I think a lot of people, with the authenticity thing, is they are struggling to know who they really are, what's unique about them. And they've been conditioned by culture, like, immensely. I mean, even myself, like, I was really interested in spirituality very young. I was exposed to spirituality very young because my parents were in an organization called Siddha Yoga. So they were part of the whole thing with the hippies going to the India and getting gurus and stuff. So I was exposed to spiritual concepts very young. And in spite of that, I was conditioned by culture, and especially, I guess, what you could call postmodernism. And through my journey since 2012, a lot of it has been this deconditioning process of all the beliefs that were downloaded into me via culture, and I think a lot of people are struggling with that right now. So, if you are an individuated person, you're okay being authentic, you're okay being who you are, you're okay speaking your truth and upsetting people because you know yourself. And for a lot of people, I think there's this fundamental insecurity because they're still looking for belonging in the dying culture, basically. Yeah. They're not willing to let go of relationships and even family relationships and old friends because they're scared of what they might think of them. So, and the reason being is that when you make the switch from kind of Saturn level of reality, where you're kind of getting along with society in order to get approval, to the Aquarius Uranus lesson, is the true self becomes a central resource. So you don't look for validation in the world. You're looking for validation from you living in alignment with who you truly are. And that's easier said than done, because what comes up is all of the conditioning, all of the wounds from childhood, all of the ways that we look for approval in the outer world. We talked about this in our course a lot, but a lot of the things that people want in life, those aren't their real desires. That's been programmed into them via culture, right? And I think in many ways too, the spiritual path gets hijacked by this kind of spiritual materialism, where people want to engage in self-work, but only because they want something out of it. They don't want to do it to have a connection to the divine or something. It's just because they think they're going to get something out of it. So that's the shift that needs to happen. There almost needs to be this larger sense of faith that something beyond this world can fulfill you, I guess you could say.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's interesting. I was talking about this the other day, that I've found, especially during travels where I've spent time at different meditation centers or retreat centers, and I've met people who have done like a complete flip, where they were like hardcore corporate bankers, etc., and then they just completely flip and exchange one kind of attachment and identity to, like, no, I'm now the spiritual person and everything's great. And love and light, and we're just going to sit here and hug each other all day, and there's only positivity. And while that's, I think, a place on the journey from disconnecting from the matrix, it's still, you're just attaching to something else as your identity, so it doesn't feel like it has that quality of truth to it, like when you do go through these deep processes of shadow work and just, lying on the floor and weeping and holding space for that and snot coming out of your nose and et cetera, et cetera. So I'm curious if you
Yeah.
could talk about that. Yeah, I want you to talk about that a little bit because you had said you had experienced during your journey a little spiritual bypassing. Plus, I also am curious about this postmodernism and being a social justice warrior and the deconditioning from that. I'd love to hear your journey and story on that as well.
Yeah, so okay, so which one should I start with, the postmodernism or the other part?
Whatever you
Yeah,
feel
I think
called
that's
to.
normal, like the ego, what you talk about, like everyone replaces their regular matrix ego with a new spiritual ego, and then that's another layer of deconditioning as well. And the point is just to arrive at just being a real human. Like you don't need to adopt this weird spiritual avatar, like you're a special light worker all of a sudden, just be a human, like try doing that because that's really hard. And then the postmodernism, I mean, yeah, that's something I'm still deconditioning now, because the thing is a lot of my own beliefs and the things that I cared about do link up with that kind of culture. So basically, to give you the rundown, I just grew up around liberal progressive types in Canada, as part of the culture I lived in. When I was a teenager, I was like kind of like a punk rock hippie type, like anti-authority, anti-mainstream, not quite a feminist, but I did read a lot of feminist authors, and I just was just a hardcore rebel really young. And I actually used to skateboard to a job that I had at a pot cafe. And I thought I was like this huge badass. And this is before Antifa. This is like pre-Antifa kind of rebellion, and just kind of blaming the mainstream media, corporations for everything, and basically I really identified with the plight of Indigenous people, which I still do, and in general, environmental causes. So that was kind of the hook where I started getting conditioned by some postmodernist theory. That was kind of how it hooked into me. So it started to fuse into this game of identity politics, right? Like oppressor, oppressed. And the more oppressed a culture was, the more empathy I had for them. But at the crux of this, and I really only discovered this, I think, in 2016 or 2017, and like years into my own healing journey, when I started doing family constellation work, which is like working with ancestral trauma, basically. And I could see through working with my Japanese ancestors, who were actually all put into internment camps in World War II, including my father. My father was born in an internment camp. So they did really experience racism before, during, after the war. So did my brothers, but I could see how my activism was being informed by unhealed wounds via that trauma, basically. So, and I see that happening in the world right now, is like, even with all the protests going on in America last year, it just, the depth of the unhealed trauma and the projection going on was just reminding me of myself in many ways. So I started speaking out against that. People called me evil, white supremacist. They canceled me and all sorts of stuff. That was also a really good initiation for my own individuation process. But basically, a lot of this ideology that I think is really prevalent in millennials and the generation below that is being informed by Marxism. And I didn't even realize that, because it was just part of the culture. Like, you grow up, you become a part of the world, and you get conditioned by this culture. Mm-hmm. So when I kind of turned my life to the spiritual path in 2012, and I really committed to healing, I could see that this ideology that I had thought was the way the world was, it was really toxic. It involved a lot of shadow projection, and it was just far from love. Like, it was not helping my relationships to blame white men for everything at all. And I could see that clearly. I was like, this is not right. There was something in my conscience that saw that. So I basically just started to question everything. And as I started doing that, all the ideologies collapsed, and I could see how manipulative and backwards they had become. So, I think that that's kind of the journey we're on right now. And for me, that's like kind of the deeper question, is like, I think there is an ideology which is really removed from nature, which is really removed from truth, which has become really prevalent in society. And I don't know how we're going to decondition ourselves collectively from this. It's taken over the schools. It's taken over, the mainstream media. It's like, it's everywhere now. Like, this was a niche when I was into this kind of ideology, and now it's hit the mainstream. So, yeah.
There's it's a video I recommend to people all the time, and it's Yuri Bezmenov's interview with G. Edward Griffin about
Mhm.
ideological subversion. It's such a good go-to to really see how things have gone, and how something can be a niche, and then within 10, 15 years, it becomes part of the mainstream. Which, you talked about how back in the days, you were like riding your skateboard, you're like, fuck the system, fuck corporate America, fuck all this. But then here we are today, where people who identify more as progressive or liberal are identifying and in alignment with these huge establishments, whether it's big government, big pharma, big tech, mainstream media. And it's just, I don't know, it just blows my mind, and I'm not trying to play this right left game, because I'm a human being, I'm an independent thinker. So I'm not going to sit here and say I'm this side of the political spectrum. But when I see people who consider themselves to be super all about inclusivity and all about tolerance, and caring about these really intense these issues, and yet at the same time they're like, they just can't even handle the fact that you would think differently than
Yeah.
them in some ways. So I don't know, it's just interesting to see, even the whole thing about like someone like Rage Against the Machine, like I listened to that shit, man, when I was younger, and it's like, yeah, and here they are playing a jabbed only concert, like how
Yeah.
ironic.
Yeah, I think it's just a test, you really don't know who's going to pass this test. Like someone who could be, who you thought was very spiritually and self-aware is falling for the agenda, and people who maybe aren't so spiritually self-aware are seeing through the pandemic. It's amazing,
Mhm.
because I think that, and I don't know, I think it really is just a test. And I think it's about individuation. Like you can't skip the individuation process on a spiritual path. And I think that's what this is highlighting. Like if you can't think for yourself and you can't be your own person, then you're going to have your sense of who you are conditioned by culture. It's just a fact. And I think, it's really important we just examine ourselves and think about, like, okay, what do I believe? Why do I believe that? What do I value in life? Why do I value that? Like, what am I even doing in life, and why am I doing that? And be ruthlessly honest with ourselves. But the truth is most people don't want to be honest with themselves, because if you open up that can of worms, like it can just, honestly, if you're living a lie, it can rearrange your whole life. So I think that process is really important on the spiritual path, and a lot of people skip it.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm
Definitely.
blown away by what you said before, even around like the different types of people that I thought wouldn't be falling for this and the ones that aren't. And I think sometimes we put people on, I wouldn't say put people on a pedestal, but we go, oh, well, that person's spiritual. They're wearing the clothes, and they're saying the right things. Like, of course they would be coming from this enlightened higher place. Meanwhile, someone who's just, living in their small town, working on their land, doing their job, and they're just like immediately they're like, nah, I ain't about this shit. Like, forget it. So
Yeah.
I just, yeah, I think it's pretty cool to see. It's been even humbling for me to be like, oh wow, people I thought wouldn't are, and people that I thought would aren't. So it's very
Yeah.
interesting.
part
Yeah.
of part of the beauty of what's going on now is that there's a much clearer metric or barometer as to where people are. You know what I
Mhm.
mean? In terms of the whole scamdemic that's taken place, and you kind of get a little glimpse as to who's actually been doing the work and who hasn't. I mean, not to stereotype, but stereotyping based on where they're standing in terms of, what I mean, forced jabs and mandates and lockdowns and just buying into the outrageous lies. Because I mean, you know where I stand on this, Yerasimos, but as above, so below, as within, so without. The lies that they're willing to accept externally in the world, to me, just shows me a glimpse as to the lies that they haven't dealt with within themselves. The shadows
Yeah.
that we fall for without us, are the shadows that are unhealed within.
Yeah.
And there's so many people still clinging to this identity, which is why they're so easily being able to be manipulated to falling for this agenda. But the issue is, like as you mentioned, it's a dying culture. Babylon is collapsing, and anything that's identified with that is going to crumble along at the same time. And this is why it's such a painful process for so many people, because they're either forced to decide and have a look and do the work and figure out what their actual identity is, who they actually are, what their real intrinsic values are, or they're just going to continue to get dragged along by whatever these puppet masters say.
Yeah, and also it is like it will be presented with a new test. Personally, I think that it would be a very wise decision for us to get comfortable with death and grieving, especially as the node switch to Taurus and Scorpio, which is happening, I think, in a couple of weeks. Because we're already seeing a lot of injuries. We're seeing a lot of. I think it's going to get pretty intense. I have a lot of Scorpio in my chart, so I tend to be like, okay, let's get as down and dirty as possible. And then what you're going to see too, I think, in this next stage is like a lot of people are going to spiritually bypass, because it takes really strong people to like grieve and look at what's going to happen. So we'll see. I think that the Scorpio kind of people who have been dragged to hell and back will have their work cut out for them, because we're the kind of people who can kind of hold the light, I guess you could say. Like I think I wrote something where the people who know how to rebirth themselves will know how to rebirth the earth too, because we're in this period of the dawning of a new era, the dawning of a new consciousness, the dawning of a new age. And a lot of people are still clinging on to the old world, and that will just get more and more frustrating and cause more and more suffering. However, there's an opportunity, because we are entering a new age and we're entering this kind of Aquarius Leo axis. So for people who are willing to make the jump, they can make quantum leaps in consciousness, but it's the people who are resisting that evolutionary process who are going to suffer. So for example, like if your value is like, I value my own bodily and autonomy, and I don't want to put anything in it that doesn't feel right for my body, and you've been working as a nurse for years and you have to quit your job, then that's a turning point. If you stay with your old job, you're kind of staying with the old world. If you're willing to quit and apply your skills and your own, unique gifts to something new, you can make that jump. But I think that a lot of people are actually scared to make that jump.
Yeah. And that's what they're prying on. They're prying on people being unwilling to make that jump. And ultimately I feel like they're just trying to grab the lowest density of the collective as well, because of just the way it's targeted, and I mean how obvious it is at this point. You know what I mean? And this is why I consider the real shift or the real transition. I mean, talk about Aquarius is the healing that needs to take place is moving from a collectivist ideology into individualism on some level, and understanding ourselves as unique individuals, because for so long we've just been gaslighted by this culture that's tried to tell us who we are, how we should behave, what we stand for, what's right, what's wrong. And we're so disconnected from natural morality, or what morality is in general. We don't even know what that is within ourselves.
Yes.
And the process of that is you have to figure that out on your own, and most people, they're just still so conditioned to look for someone else that has the answers, someone who kind of believes the same thing that they believe, then try follow and copy everything that they're doing. But part of this process is that there's no two paths the same. There's no one path to doing the work or to spirituality or to whatever it is. It's having to sit there and decide and make choices and make decisions. And that's difficult when, for the most part, we've never really had that inherent rite of passage of moving into adulthood, because we're still looking to the government as father and to farmer as mummy, and to be like, oh shit, I've got to hold myself accountable for my own decisions. That's a place that a lot of people aren't willing to go still.
Yeah, personal responsibility is a huge part of that, right? You have to take responsibility for your own personal karma in order to actually move into the individuation process as well. And a lot of people are still looking for someone to blame, whether it's in our circles it's like entities, or I'm being psychically attacked, and other people it's like, oh, it's institutional racism. That's the reason that I'm having struggles, so we're always looking for someone to blame. And personal responsibility means you have to be responsible for everything. Like even with myself and my own healing journey, I had to take responsibility for even stuff that happened in past lifetimes that led me to the lifetime that set me up in this lifetime. And that's kind of like this Pandora's box, to realize that if we've been abused in one lifetime, we have maybe been the abuser in other lifetimes. And I really like what Jordan Peterson says, even though I don't agree with a lot of the things he does now, including doing jabbed only tour. But he says that when you read history, you need to read it as a perpetrator. And I think that that's a good way of doing shadow work, because a lot of us want to identify as the hero in history. But if we read it as a perpetrator, we can really start to see how, you know, all of us carry the seed for evil within us. And to the extent that we're aware of that side of ourselves and we can really understand that part of our nature, is to the extent we have conscious choice over it, you know.
Mhm.
And it really is this deep unraveling of personal responsibility. I think even in our courses, we go into evolutionary astrology, which really looks at the effects of Pluto on Uranus, and looking at more evolutionary trauma, meaning trauma that's happened over lifetimes. Like, I think that that's coming up now. And a lot of us, for example, who speak truth, you know, we may have really strong Uranus signatures in our chart, and we've been burned at the stake and killed and really ostracized for speaking truth, like we are now. You know, we're not getting killed yet, but, you know, it's bringing up that memory from the deeper levels of mind. So I think that, you know, we're not only taking personal responsibility for ourselves and our own healing journey and our own ancestral lineage, but we're taking personal responsibility for all of the previous lifetimes that led to this point.
Yeah, it's so funny you mentioned that. I think the word for it is atavistic. It's this ancestral mind, all these ancestral memories that come up. And I want to know your opinion on this, because I've dealt with some of this stuff myself, and a lot of people talk about, you know what I mean, past lifetime healing and trauma and stuff like that. Like I've had an experience where I had these ongoing dreams of a past lifetime, and I was literally like a savage, like raiding these villages, and like it was super intense, and like, you mean, it involved other people as well. And this was an ongoing thing for me, and this was something I had to deal with. And like, but like, how does someone know what's real and what's not in that realm? You know, how do you come to, is there an objective standpoint of, wow, this was a past lifetime for me, that, you mean, or is it more so just, yeah, that feeling, that memory, that, you know, that resonance?
Yeah, I think, well, the way that, you know, so Uranus in evolutionary astrology represents the memories that we carry from pre-birth states, from bardo states, and from other lifetimes, and how that usually comes through to us is through dreams, active imaginative processes. And it's very hard for people to kind of trust those intuitive realms until you start kind of living in that space, right? It also goes against the conditioning of the world. They're like, oh, you're just making it up, right? But I would say that especially the dreams, you know, and you can kind of tell, because my dreams are just really weird and bizarre, unless they're past lifetime dreams. And then they're very clear, and the narrative is and they just kind of hit you a little bit differently too, you know? So I think the dream world is a really great place to unlock those past lifetime memories. Like, even when all of this stuff was happening last year and we were getting like canceled and whatnot, I was having dreams of, it was that we were kind of in this movement where we were rising up against the government, basically similar to what's happening now. And it was crazy because there were kids that were marching in this revolutionary movement. I don't know when it was from, you know, and it was actually exactly when the transiting south node was hitting my Uranus in the sixth house, activating those memories. So I think, you know, a lot of us, especially more intuitive types, we start to get little inklings of this, you know, throughout our day, even through synchronicities and stuff. But the problem is we don't know how to read it, and we don't trust it as well. So it kind of, it comes through this different level of mind that we're used to, like even the level of mind that we're communicating with right now, which is more the Gemini level of mind. It comes through this more subtle layer of mind. And it actually comes through a lot of the time is like really intense core beliefs. So like, if I speak out, I'll be killed kind of stuff, you know, they're really over almost like, and they may not necessarily be able to link with a memory that happens in this lifetime. That's how I make the distinction. So I don't have any memories of this kind of dream that I was telling you about. It was another culture. It was another, you know, era of time, you know. So I think there's many different kinds of dreams that we can have. And especially when you start to, at least is what I found. I have a North Node in the 12th house. So this is also maybe why it's been part of my path, but it just starts to unlock, once you open yourself up to that realm.
Yeah.
Yeah. I also find too, well, Joel, you can go.
No, I was going to say I definitely hear you in that regard as well. It's little. It comes down to, yeah, for sure, trusting those other realms, trusting your own intuition, and leaning into that. It can be quite subtle at times. But at the same time, once you begin to play with dream work and active imagination and right brain consciousness, you begin to develop intuition as a result of this, in actually trusting yourself and making decisions and acting according to your intuition, according to what's coming up, and actually considering that as holding purpose and holding meaning, as opposed to just being nothing and random, and you know what I mean. Anything other than the material world is meaningless to my reality. And I found in my process that was the same kind of way that I began to deal with my shadows. Was that there'd be little whispers coming up, little things coming up, which was saying, you need to resolve this, something needs to be sorted out. And for the longest time, my monkey mind was like, no, I can't go there. I can't deal with that. That can't be the path. But it'll just continue to pry and show different ways to present itself consciously and unconsciously in your reality. And so it's like, all right, this must be the path. I have to deal with that. And once you begin to trust what comes up and then act based on what's coming up, that's when you really develop and strengthen intuition, I found, because that voice becomes louder as a result as well.
For sure, exactly. And that's the main thing, is that people don't listen to that voice. So you made the decision to consciously engage with the evolutionary process. And the majority of problems and frustrations and difficulties people face is because they ignore that voice. And they're like, oh, I just suppress. And then a decade later, and the reason I don't recommend doing that is just understanding how Pluto works, especially on an evolutionary basis, is that you suppress what you are setting yourself up for later is what's called cataclysmic evolution through an outer event. So maybe, for like a decade that you're supposed to leave a marriage, and you just ignore this voice in your head, and you just kind of shut yourself down in order to survive. And then eventually your partner walks through the door and is like, hey, I'm leaving you. That's the cataclysmic event that hits you. So that's why I recommend, just as you did, that people consciously listen to that voice and engage with the evolutionary process, because in that way, at least in your own personal evolution, you're choosing more of a steady growth than a cataclysmic growth. Because you can't, and especially when we're going through this Pluto transit, the Pluto return in the US, and Scorpio is going to be, the nodes are switching to the Taurus Scorpio axis, is like, people really have to be willing to respond to that. And just, I have Pluto on my sun, and I've always felt that there was this evolutionary force kind of hunting me down almost, and if I didn't solve a problem when it started showing itself, it would blow up in my face later. So I made the conscious decision that I was going to, act on those things on a daily basis, and it's not easy, because we have to be open to change every single day, basically.
I think that's why.
Sorry, man. Yeah, just quickly. It's not easy.
Go.
I'm 29th degree Scorpio sun as well, and I feel you. So yeah.
I think we talk about dreams, and I think there could be so many ways to take them in. But Carl Jung, I believe, said dreams are messages from God.
Yes.
So I think from a depth psychological standpoint, these dreams, these images, these energies, these qualities can represent those parts of us that we haven't integrated, that we haven't even developed. And so I find it in my life, there's that knock on the door from the unconscious to go, hey, integrate me, or pay attention to me, whatever the case may be. And I think also what I've found, even when I've slowed down my mind, maybe I've spent more time in nature, is that I get to connect to that wisdom and that intelligence in a much deeper way. And so I think when you think about these architects of control, these social engineers, part of this whole, let's distract you as much as you can. Let's take you away from more of that right brain thinking, from the imagery, from the art, from the unconscious. That's part of it, is that we're going to try to disconnect you from that intuition and from that wisdom that's literally presenting itself to you. You can say every night, that has this knowledge for you.
Yeah, and we have to have the will to, focus on what really matters to us, and the discipline to develop ourselves in that ways in this kind of world, because we live in this attention economy. Even myself, especially 2020 last year, I just found myself scrolling through Twitter, like looking for some sort of like answer, because we want to find certainty in the outer world, and then there was a shift in 2021 where I just kind of like took a step back and returned to myself. I was like, no, I got to really maintain my connection to God, just for the people that we work with at the very least, because I can see it's getting worse than I guess I anticipated, even though, I'm sure many people have listened to Bernhard. He knows what's going to go on and what the agenda has for a long time, but it's really maintaining I've said it so many times in so many different ways, but we need to maintain a connection to a higher power or God or whatever you want to call it to survive this, and that's really the ultimate Scorpio lesson, is that it pushes us to our limits, and in me, it literally pushed me to the brink of death, basically, in order for us to regenerate the spiritual power to reach past that impasse and gain a new level of ourselves. That's the phoenix rebirthing. So just when we think we're being pushed to our limit is usually when we gain the spiritual strength to break through, and we have a breakthrough, right? And I think that's what may be needed for people who are kind of ignoring those little calls from the deeper self, is that they're going to get pushed and pushed and pushed until they get put to the brink. And then it's like, can you generate the spiritual strength to reach this next phase of you, or are you going to collapse? So that's a choice we all have to make.
Mm-hmm. What do you think is going to occur in the next year?
Oh my God.
Personally speaking, and even from you're a student of astrology,
Yeah.
teacher of astrology, like what do you, even on that level, what's happening?
So the next year, I guess it depends where you are, right? Like I think everything that's affecting the US will affect the entire world. I think a lot of what we're seeing building up, so we see these kind of like revolutions arising, and I think that will come to the forefront when Pluto enters Aquarius, I think in 2023. So we're kind of seeing a build up to like a worldwide revolution. I think that's the case. I mean, Pluto in Aquarius can also mean mass trauma as well. It can mean mass individuation. It's a mass of people going through an Aquarius process is a good way to look at it. And for the next year, I think in the US in particular, because I live here now, I'm actually from Canada originally, we are going to go through a collective dark night of the soul. It's already happening, and as everyone knows, a lot of people who study astrology, with Pluto tends to bring up what's been suppressed and buried, so the Pluto return, especially the second 8th house axis, like it is really about survival and the resources that you have to survive. So you're going to see like economic struggles, inflation's already happening, people losing their job, being put into survival mode. In Capricorn, it's also just the changing of the old guard. I think that with Pluto and Capricorn especially, we're going to see a lot of more corruption being exposed in government power structures in general. So I think also, and I don't know, I just have my ideas. I'm not really good at I'm not really a predictive astrologer, but I have my ideas based on what I see happening too. The Jeffrey Epstein case seems like it's connected to a lot of people in high positions of power. So that could be part of the whole expose. I don't know yet. What else? I kind of made some notes.
I just want to say real quickly, right before you mentioned Jeffrey Epstein, what popped into my head was Jeffrey Epstein didn't kill himself. And then you just said Jeffrey.
Oh, really? Yeah.
I thought that was really interesting.
Yeah, I mean, he was connected to so many of these powerful people and their deepest shadows, right? So this could be a bit of a domino that kind of exposes a lot of that, right? I also think there's going to be a changing in the banking, economics system, even health system, and just we're going to have to come to terms with this massive amount of collective debt through, all of the bailouts we've given for the last year. The second house also represents the core values of the United States that it was founded upon, which seems like it's going through a revolution, so what I'm keeping my eyes out for is anything that has to do with a constitutional crisis, because I think that it's going to be on a big level. Like the values of the United States is changing. I don't know which way it's going to go into, because it's really about the collective consciousness, right? It's like we each have our own piece of the puzzle on what direction we evolve in, you know? So definitely some economic struggles is a part of it, but also just, you know, a lot of people are going to get kicked into survival mode on a basic physical level, you know, and that survival mode is actually meant to help them generate a new sense of spiritual power, I feel. So we're going to, I mean, I personally think it's going to get crazy, and I'm ready for it. But a lot of people are going to have to really be pushed to their limits in order for them to, you know, uncover those hidden strengths, I guess you could say. You know, I think a lot of people, especially when we work in retreats, like I think the biggest obstacle for people who want some sort of healing in their lives is they want one part of their life to stay the same, and they're willing to change other parts, you know. And I think especially with the Scorpio archetype, we have to be comfortable with change and with getting rid of whatever is causing stagnancy for us, whether that's a marriage of 20 years, whether that's a job that we spend a lot of money to train for, you know. Like it all has to burn in the ashes if it's not serving our higher spiritual evolution. And so we're each going to be called to do that in our own way, you know. And it's kind of what Joel said is like, you know, like you can consciously engage with that process of evolution, or you can resist it. And if we collectively resist it, then we will see more cataclysmic changes, even in natural disasters and all of these earth changes that we saw. I don't know if you saw, but in Vancouver, Canada, there was all these floods all of a sudden, you know. This is the response to the collective consciousness and what we're trying to suppress. So we're going to see it with earth changes as well. And then what's going to happen is they're going to blame climate change and whatnot and externalize it at another level, you know. So yeah, I don't know if that answered your question, but those are just kind of ideas I have on what could happen.
Yeah. No, I appreciate it. I mean, we're just here having a dialogue conversation, you know. I'm not going to come back in a year and be like, well, Laura, you said this on whatever the date is today, 12/6. Your prediction didn't come true. You're canceled.
Yeah. Well, I'm not, the thing is because like I really I highly recommend anyone who's getting into astrology to look into the work of Dana Rudhyar, who was really the forefathers of astrology as we know it today. And he really makes a point that, you know, it is up to the consciousness that creates the chart. So we think the natal chart tells us everything about a person, and evolutionary astrology, the concept is that the consciousness that's interacting with the chart creates the chart. And I feel like that, you know, so take the Pluto return of the US as its own chart, you know, and the consciousness of all the people involved in this is affecting the chart as we speak as well. So it's like we need a lot with Pluto. It's like we need a lot of people to create a massive change, and you see it happening, you know. But I think the main thing as well is that people are almost like they're externalizing things, even the political sphere or whatever, you know. You see the battle between the right and the left, you know, and both of them are just shadow projecting as well. Like it's not like, it has to be at a new level of consciousness, I guess is what I'm trying to say. And so that's why we dedicate ourselves to doing this kind of work, where we talk about what's going on in the world, and then we're like, okay, but what is your own personal shadow, and what's your own personal transformation that needs to take place within this?
Yeah. I can't tell you how many times I've had this conversation with people where everyone wants to talk about this politician will make the changes and that politician will make the changes and that external thing will happen. And we just have to, you know, make sure that we have legit elections. And I go, okay, you know, there's some, you know, merit to rooting out corruption, but where does it start but the corruption within ourselves, within our souls?
Yes.
You know, like that's where it's going to start. It is a shift in consciousness that's required. And when that happens, then we'll see what happens. But everyone's just like, no, that needs to be fixed. It's always outside yourself, always outside yourself. And it's like that saying, it's so corny, but you know, you point a finger, three are pointing back at you. It's like, come on, like look in the mirror, be real.
Yeah. No one is definitely coming to save us from this one. I don't think we're just going to have to go through it. And I mean, it's going to be like, what I like to do is I like to envision the timeline that I would like to see happen. And I just think about how good it would feel to know that through the process of our own spiritual evolution, we toppled a global totalitarian dictatorship. Like that's going to be, that would be amazing, right? Like to think that we the people rose up and did that. And I think that's really going to be, you know, the anthem is like, we the people are going to save ourselves, you know. And so we're going to see that. And I mean, Pluto and Aquarius is going to, I really feel we're going to see a worldwide revolution, you know. So we'll see how that goes. But
Wait.
I'm excited, actually. Part of me is excited, and a part of me is like, oh shit, I can't believe it's getting that bad. And the other part is like, oh my God, this is awesome. You know, and I kind of go back and forth between the two extremes throughout the day.
Yeah. I hear you. And like we speak about these cataclysmic events that can occur when we decide to repress shadows for a long period of time as opposed to dealing with them. I mean, really, isn't this entire event that cataclysm? Isn't the collective facing a shadow that they've been ignorant of willingly for the longest of time? And so there's a universal reconciling happening right now. There's checks and balances being taken place for what wasn't dealt with for so long, you know? And to me, it is very exciting too. Like I'm pretty much in the forefront of, you mean the Australian protests and the Australian rallies. I speak at a lot of them and I perform at a lot of them as well. I'm a conscious hip hop artist. And just these events themselves, like I remember they go from 30 people 3 years ago to 3,000 people a couple of years ago to 150,000 people last weekend in Sydney, you know, and it doubles, triples, if not quadruples each time that these events take place. And this isn't going anywhere. These people aren't going away. It's not like there's going to be a comatose taking place for all these people that have now awakened to the reality of what's going on and are beginning to question things. Like the genie is never going back in the bottle. So it's just crazy to think what's actually going to occur when this comes to a head and there's millions of people in the street going, what the fuck, you know? Yeah. And it's coming. It's not going away. It's not going to regress. Intrinsically within myself, I know that. So it's very curious as to how things are going to unfold.
I know. We're at a turning point. I think Australia is going through its first revolution. You know, it's a very young country still, and you guys haven't really had any major kind of political events like this. You know, so Australia has its own karma as well to deal with, and its own kind of process of just individuation, I think, you know. And each country has its own process to go through. And I don't know if you saw what's happening in Germany and Austria. It's like history repeating itself, you know? And so a lot of like, and this is what the evolutionary trauma I was like speaking about is like a lot of people, you know, especially the German people, maybe it's because Bernhard's German and I've really meditated a lot and seen a lot of how that trauma of World War II impacted the German people. But they didn't actually resolve their trauma, you know, they just suppressed it. And now it's coming back. The shadows of their trauma is coming back as they kind of clamp down and they're not allowing vaccinated people to go to the grocery store. So lockdown for the unvaccinated and the vaccinated get to have their lives back, you know. And so to the extent that the country itself has not dealt with their shadows is to the extent that they have to deal with stuff too, right?
Yeah, it works
and
on every level.
Also does have its own shadows, you know, it does. It like, I don't want to like take the other side and like, even though like personally, I agree with the patriots and I understand why the Americans held on to their guns for so long, you know, but they also have their own issues to deal with, you know, so we can't just look like, okay, like I'm just going to adopt a different political mindset and it's going to give me all the answers. It's like, no, this is beyond that. Everything political is still in the realm of Saturn, right? And that's still the material world. And the jump we're making is into these transpersonal realms via the individuation process.
Yeah.
Well said.
It works on every layer of the collective. You mean, be it the planet, the country, the group, the individual, like each creates its own unique karma and its own unique shadows, which have to be dealt with on some level. And yeah, you're right. In Australia, we never won our freedom. It's very different to the US here. You know, we barely have a constitution. We don't have a Bill of Rights. We don't have guns. We never went through any kind of rite of passage where we valued what it means to be a free and sovereign individual. And this could very much be the reason why we're experiencing it so harsh at the moment and why it had to be experienced this way, which is equivalent and necessary to awaken what needs to awaken within the people to actually value that the way it needs to be valued, so it doesn't happen again. So I want to know, in Arizona at the moment, are vaccine passports implemented for non-essential services?
No, so it's radically different from where we were in California. I mean, even my chiropractor up the street, he's very anti-jab and pro holistic health. And he's like, everyone up here is armed. They're not going to force jab us, you know? And that's the truth, is like, we go to some stores in Arizona and they have like gun check-ins at the door. They're like this is the kind of culture that we're in, this cowboy, very American, very pro. I think it's the Second Amendment, right? Is that the gun? Yeah, they're very pro Second Amendment, and that, I think that's the thing that saves them from tyranny. I mean, it was written into the Constitution, right? So even though I don't, you know, I can also see their unconsciousness too, by the way, but I have to say, knowing that there's a large amount of the population in Arizona who have guns to protect themselves from the government makes me feel a bit safer, because I know if they're going to come door to door and try and like force jab us, which is like the worst nightmare, I don't think it's going to get to that, because they can't, because too many American citizens are armed. So and I hope it doesn't go to that. Like, I don't know, like we'll see. I think a lot of our battles are actually fought in court these days, you know, so this kind of civil war type scenario, I don't know if it's going to happen, because that's just not how we fight battles these days. It's more of psychological warfare, more of like legal warfare. You know, but if it came down to it, I don't think they could actually get away with complete tyranny, at least in the US, because I've been exposed to this kind of real American culture, and like, they're not going to have it, you know?
Yeah.
So I think that that's why also as well, they've targeted the schools and they've really gone hard with the indoctrination, because I think they know they can't really get away with it in this generation, with the generations that are alive right now. But if they were to indoctrinate, you know, the Pluto and Sagittarius generation, Pluto and Capricorn, the younger generations, you know, they could get the consensus to go along with it, you know.
Yeah, it's, and
so
again,
it's free here. It's really free here, actually. It's night and day. You know, we don't have to deal with passports. We didn't wear masks when we went to the grocery store. You know, Bernhard wears like funny shirts to the grocery stores here, like fear is the real virus, and just like calling out the pandemic and stuff, and like no one gives a shit, you know. Sedona in particular is an interesting mix. It's definitely a majority like Democrats as far as like the political culture, but there's a lot of like kind of new age truthers, and also kind of cowboy Republican types, I guess you could say. So with that amount, like the consensus here is generally at least 50-50, you know. Whereas if I were to actually be back in Vancouver, where I'm from, I know that the politics is very far left, and I would have a much different experience, you know. Which is why we positioned ourselves here, because it's just like, for me, you know, when all the riots happened, I wanted to get out of LA anyway when I moved there to be with Bernhard when we got married, you know, just because it was just too much. I had too much kind of, it was just a lot of energy for me, you know. But when we moved here, it was like just a breath of fresh air. Like, we got our freedom back, basically. So you see these different realities happening in different states right now, you know, and yeah, like I never really understood the whole American gun culture until this year, and I was like, oh, this makes sense, like why you would have guns, to protect yourself from a tyrannical government, because a government could become tyrannical, and they are becoming tyrannical, you know. Yet at the same time, I think that this whole constitutional crisis, like, I think the values of the United States will have to change as well. So there's a lot of people within the kind of conservative Republican movement who think that they're just going to return to like 1776, and that's not going to happen either, you know.
Yeah, I think also too, the one thing with being able to have your own guns is that, yes, of course, if a government really wanted to like use its firepower against its population, like, they can. But when you think about you know, your police officers, or even some of the soldiers, like if they were going to risk getting shot going to someone's door to enforce some vaccine mandate, they're less likely to go along with it. You know, I think in places where people don't have guns, some of these people are more likely to just look, I'm just doing what I'm told. I'm doing what I'm told. Whereas here in America, like all you need is like 10, 15 people to get shot that are trying to do some of this shit when they go up to someone's house. And I
Yeah.
think things would change. People are not, these people, these frontline workers or police officers, they might be less likely to go along with it when they literally could lose their life.
Totally. Yeah, exactly. So they can't actually implement a full-on tyrannical government because there's too many people that are armed. It would result in a bloodbath. And they,
Yeah.
so what I think is actually going to happen, and it could happen, maybe not going to happen, but you see this happening, isn't Australia, these massive fines for opening your business and stuff. I don't know if you saw that going around, Joel. It's like $500,000 was one of the fines for for breaking COVID restrictions. So if they do anything, they're going to start doing stuff like that. And then in that case, I actually, the thing I'm concerned about is like, I mean, I think what we're going to see is all these underground networks rising if it were to get to that point of tyranny where they were like literally like, okay, if you're not jabbed, you can't go to the hospital or something, which I don't want to go to the hospital anyway, but if I broke my arm or got in a car accident or something, you would have to, but I think what you're going to see, and this is also another Aquarian thing, is you're going to see these like almost like underground networks organizing themselves as that were to happen, which is pretty common in communist regimes, is like people figure out a way. So they don't let you in the grocery store. The person who sells eggs is going to be selling eggs on the black market or whatever. So it's like, it's going to create an underground society basically, which I think is already happening. Like we have Telegram now. Like even today I opened on my Instagram and they're like, your account could get deleted because I shared articles that were literally in Forbes. So we're already seeing these underground networks kind of building, and I think that's just going to expand, especially as the tyrannical measures get worse and worse. So I know with a lot of people too last year, like they took their kids out of school and started homeschooling them, and now we have a homeschool pods going on, another kind of alternate education network that's building. So I think that's what's going to happen, is you're going to have kind of the old world is going to exist. There's going to be another reality that's going to coexist on the physical level alongside with it, and who knows what's going to happen from that point forward. But I wrote this tweet, like, I think it was like it was 2020 when this all started, that like, never has it become more apparent than it has this year that you could be standing next to another person and living in an entirely different reality. And I think those different realities will literally start to manifest in physical form, So I think it is really important during these times to network with like-minded people, and find the others, just so that you can have a support system in some way, as much as a spiritual foundation will help us on a psychological, emotional, spiritual level. There is like organizing that will need to be done just on a purely practical basis, so like finding a doctor, who agrees with you or something, just little ways that you can kind of prepare yourself for potential and what's to come. Because I think that there is a certain level of the Taurus archetype can definitely get into survival mode and like resource hoarding, and you see people that right now. I think it's a good idea to start prepping, but you don't want to get into this kind of like you don't want to be like driven by fear, you want to be driven by just like, okay, like how can I build something that's stable? How can I be self-reliant too? So even for us, like we figured out ways that we don't have to go to the grocery store anymore. So say if they did implement a passport on the grocery store, we would have ways to get food, So little things like this is like this Taurus survival mode has an intelligence in it. Like one of the most Taurus people I know, she actually has been prepping for the apocalypse for like 10 years now, like at least. So I think that there's a certain amount of physical preparation and like organization that needs to be done just out of pure practical reasons,
Yeah, I mean, most of what you said is already happening here in Australia already. Yeah, the $500,000 fine thing, that's to do with Victoria, Melbourne. The pandemic bill just got passed. Yes. They got dictator Dan Andrews, and I mean, just on a foundational level, this actually provides him with more power than what Hitler had. So in Queensland, you have Anastasia, the premier there, and basically she said that unvaccinated cannot go to hospital unless it's an emergency.
Wow. Yeah. See, so that's the kind of world that you see kind of coming, and that's why I think building alternate kind of systems outside of it is going to be really key. And so then, and then what's going to happen at that point, the government's trying to clamp down on that, but I have faith in we the people. I don't think the government is slow. It tends to take a long time to do things, and I feel that the way things are going is that people are organizing faster than they can catch up with, So we'll see. Like, I mean, I felt the world was going to kind of end in 2016, and I moved to a cabin in the woods and got into full survival mode. And I was just 4 years too early, So I've been kind of in this space for a little while now where I could just see stuff was building up and stuff was starting to hit the fan. And now it's like, okay, it really is happening. And I think we have to prepare ourselves for the worst emotionally, psychologically, and spiritually, and just organize, like just find the others, find like-minded people who are on the same page as you. For me, I'm like, my test of friendship is like, if I got thrown into the gulags, would you defend me kind of thing now, because we really want to find allies too, because it could get to that point. I know in Australia, it's really disturbing watching these camps that they're putting people in, and people justifying it and being like, oh, they're having such a good time. It's not that big of a deal. It's like, no, people are being put into camps against their will. This has historically always been a bad decision, so I think we need to prepare for that. And I am prepared to go to the gulags, like that's how I feel though. Like I like that's what gives me strength to actually speak out and do the kind of work we're doing and be in my own integrity and stand in the truth, because I know that they could do the worst possible thing to me and I would still be fine. And I think that's also the mindset we got to get into too, it's like, okay, you really want to, like, I have all these like kind of alternate plans and like what would happen if I got thrown into the gulags and all sorts of kind of stuff going on, because I don't know where it's going to go, but I do think the ultimate source of protection is your own level of being, so our level of being will also dictate the part of reality that we live in as well, so if we are just focused on reading social media and consuming bad food and not healing our trauma and just living from a very unconscious place, then we're actually going to see more chaos and more craziness. But if we actually align with some sort of higher power within ourselves, I do think that there is divine protection and divine guidance, which can help us through these times.
I agree 100%. And I just want you to know I got your back in the gulag.
Okay. Yeah, I actually realized that because I'm really good at, I would do this thing last year to like entertain myself where I pretend to be a social justice warrior and pretend I just got totally brainwashed by the agenda and was like switching sides all of a sudden. And I'm going to use that skill because I know that if they did do a gulag, they would do a re-education kind of camp. So I think that pretending to be an indoctrinated kind of cultural Marxist will be a good survival skill in the gulags.
Nice. You should definitely write an ebook on that.
How to survive
the gulag.
How to survive life in the gulag.
Yeah, it's really easy. Just blame white people and colonialism and white men for everything, and then you're good. Then you
could just write the Gulag Archipelago Volume 4.
So good. Yeah, and I mean, the passports are implemented here. Technically, the unvaccinated, they can't do anything non-essential, right? We can only go to grocery stores and do what's essential. Otherwise, you can't go to a restaurant, can't go to a kids' play center to take your kids out. You can't enter any of these places that aren't deemed non-essential without having to show someone your green tick here in Australia at the moment. And they've moved the deadline of when technically the unvaccinated can be reintegrated into society, but it's a deadline that keeps getting kicked down the road as things shift and things change. So yeah, people.
So you're in Sydney right now, right?
Yeah, I'm in Sydney. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. That's crazy. So how is that for you?
Well, I mean, I obviously knew this was coming for a long time. You mean my family?
How are you dealing with that? Like, have you just kind of slowly adjusted to having your rights taken away, or?
Well, I consider myself free and I live free, and I live free regardless. My philosophy, which I can borrow from one of our guests, Topher Fields, is that good people break bad laws. So for the most part, our life hasn't dramatically changed that much, if I can say that. The entire time, like it's become less intense now because, you know, I mean, technically we're not in a lockdown anymore. During the peak of it, when the fear was incredibly heightened, like you would be so hesitant just to go into the grocery store without a mask on, simply because of how hostile the crowd was. And the crowd, you mean? And yeah, you're right. It's been an initiation for me as well, going through all of that and having to deal with all of that. I mean, I've been harassed by the police for simply, you mean, sitting down on the grass, eating a cucumber during my hour of free time when you're supposed to be exercising. Instead, I decided to have a little picnic with my family, and 7 police officers literally approached us. And they fined me and my wife, and they tried to arrest me simply because we were sitting down as opposed to exercising during this hour that we were given as free time.
How
So
much was the fine?
it's been wild. It's been absolutely crazy. But
They'd be less likely to do that if y'all were strapped.
yeah,
Just saying.
Yeah, true. No,
no, it is true.
It's true. Like,
Yeah.
you know, and that's and when you see this, like I'm Canadian, so I'm not really exposed to this American culture. I was more just, you know, saw it on the movies, I guess you could say. But I mean, there's some old school Americans in Arizona who wear cowboy hats, who are open carry and stuff. And I know that they're not going to F with them. So they're going to leave me alone, because if they're not going to F with them, they'll leave me alone, you know?
If you look at the data, there's less crime in places with open carry laws. You know? You're less likely to do shit when someone's like, yo, I'm going to fuck you up.
Yeah. And I think that, you know, I don't know, like Australia also has its own kind of soul lessons. I know that you guys were a British colony for a long time. I lived in Melbourne for 3 years too, by the way.
Wow.
So it's very disturbing to watch, like all these places I used to go totally boarded up, the economic devastation, you know, but it will really be about like we, the people, like Australia needs to stand up as well and like really reclaim their power. And I don't know, maybe you guys get some other weapons that you guys can get since they took your guns away, but there has to be, you know, I think that
it's
also
happening. It's definitely happening.
Yeah,
happening.
I see it. Yeah, and I think that you know, Australia just got used to kind of getting taken care of by being part of the British colonies and stuff, and it was kind of a bit of a nanny country. It seemed like a lot of people just going along with the rules and stuff. And I think that Australia needs its own revolution and its own rebellion, you know, and the people have been taken care of by the government for so long that's like, okay, like how can we, where can we go from here, you know? So
yeah. And it is awakening. Australia has a very beautiful and unique spirit at the core, at the core of it, which is coming to light now. And you mean it works both ways, like the we don't give a fuck attitude. You mean, yeah, whatever. That works both ways. In the beginning, it worked within the realm of, oh yeah, it'll be right. It'll sort itself out. And now it's kind of shifting towards, you know what I mean? Nah, fuck you, don't tell me what to do. You know what I mean? Simple as that. And this is kind of the spirit that I see building within Australia, which is, you mean, good to see. Certainly. Who knows, Laura? I mean,
I have faith.
We're in the game right now. It's all unfolding as we're going through it, you know? And
yeah, I have faith in the people.
Me too.
Yeah, and we just got to hold on to our hats, you know, like if we can just be comfortable with facing the darkness, it's about to be revealed within and without, and find something beyond this world to anchor onto, we can survive anything, you know. It is really about a time of survival, I think, in a key way. And we just got to be prepared, you know. I know a lot of people even in our groups are like it's going to be hard, you know. I know, because for my own Plutonian journey, this kind of stuff that I had to go through and heal was like really messy and dark and hard to deal with sometimes. And I think collectively, we also need to deal with that as well. So it's like, we as individuals have our own piece to offer this, you know, like we have our own personal unconscious, our own personal shadow. Even myself, like I could see myself wanting to fight the shadows on the wall over the last year, you know. And it's not that we don't speak up for things that are important to us and we just do inner work. That's not it. It's that any action needs to be grounded in a higher level of consciousness than the problem, basically. So it's like, it's really tempting to just get angry and want to, protest and whatever, but like the shift will happen if it's coming from a new level of consciousness as well. And I think in many ways, they're actually almost setting fuel on the fire of this polarization and this war. When I go out in the world, I don't see that many people anymore, at least in Arizona, who are like, hostile or worried about the unvaccinated or the vaccinated. I think a lot of this stuff is just this kind of culture war, and that the media is putting fans on the flames are. And I think that actually probably the majority do not want this to happen, but it really takes us to stand up in our own power to speak out against it. And the more people, the better, so like, that's why I'm like, for me, I'm just like trying to think of memes all the time because those go viral. I'm just trying to reach as many people as possible so that they can have language, so that they can say the things that maybe they don't know how to say, or they can see that other people see the same way as them, So I think that like this information war is like, we also need to like how you do, Joel, with the memes. It's like we need to kind of counter the information war with being better at the propaganda, almost like counter propaganda as well.
Yeah.
Because the propaganda is trying to make you think that the majority want this to happen, and I don't actually think that's the case. I think that there's 1/3 of people who don't want it to happen. There's 1/3 of people who want to be left alone, and there's 1/3 of people who do want it to happen. And the people who want to be left alone realize that they'll be left alone if they stand up, join with the people who don't want this to happen, then we have the majority.
Mhm.
But I think a lot of people are just afraid too. That's why the inner work is important, is because like, it's really hard to be yourself and stand up for what you believe in if you have self-worth issues, if you have unhealed trauma around people pleasing or seeking approval from other people, so it does take actually doing some sort of self-work on early childhood conditioning in order to reach this new level, and I think a lot of people are missing that, and could actually get stuck in almost like a cycle of trauma where they're again projecting on the government, the tyrannical government, all of the wounds from childhood too,
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, because the propaganda would definitely make us believe that, close to 90 to 95% of people are on board with what's going on. All the jab rates that are being propagated at us here through the media in Australia, this is what it echoes as well. And for a long time, I thought, yeah, that could be right, because a lot of people who I thought wouldn't capitulate, wouldn't fold, they ended up did folding simply because of how coercive the force was. There was a time there in the middle where, and even still now, where you can't be in the workforce, right? And when people have to provide for their families, et cetera, then they end up making these decisions that go against themselves. But now I feel a little bit differently about it for sure. But at the same time, sometimes I question, like, how much of an echo chamber are we just within the quote unquote truth community? And it's almost like there's a whole nother realm of social media that's just, completely against us, which we're not tapped into and we're not observing, because obviously we're not connected to those channels. It's difficult to gauge in that regard, but we're building something new, and it's growing, and that's certainly hopeful.
Yeah, I think it is a bit of an echo chamber sometimes, but I think the only people you have the chance to kind of convince to alternative realities are people who are kind of like on the edge, and they could go either way. If people are too far gone and really like, I don't argue with people who really buy into all this ideology and are part of the COVID call. I mean, they deleted me like last year anyway. Like I was part of this great unfriending when I started speaking out, and like I lost all of my friends, my family are hardcore leftists. They think I've lost my mind, but I have to say it always reminds me of this quote by Carl Jung, where he says one of the best things you can do is disappoint your family, actually. And I think that's what a lot of people are scared to do, is like they're actually, from a basic Jungian perspective, they're living the unlived life of their parents, and they're still looking for their approval, So I think a lot of people, and that's the consensus state, that's the mainstream, is like they're just going along with the programming. It's like, oh, it's going to make my life hard. It's like, if I was a nurse right now, like, and I had to quit my job, I would never have been a nurse anyway. It's just not something that interests me. But, we live in this era of entrepreneurship. entrepreneurship. Like, quit your job, look at the, like, you could learn like a course in 3 months and start to being a coach, you know, like be creative, you know. So anyone who says that they had to do it for their job or whatever, I question that, because if it came down to it, maybe that's my own personal value, is I would be inventive and creative, and I would reinvent myself, you know. But I think, again,
100%.
it goes back to like wanting a paycheck and being attached to these old systems and being like, okay, if I want to make money, I have to go to school for 8 years. I have to, you know, jump through all these hoops. Like, that's the Saturn level of working. It doesn't need to be like that anymore. Like, we literally have like so much information in front of us. A lot of my learning, a lot of my training came online, actually. You know, I did in-person stuff, but a lot of it came online. And I think people are just wasting this tremendous opportunity to rebuild their lives. You know, no one's being pressured into this when it comes down to it, unless they actually show up and they force it into you. And even then, that would be their karma to bear. You know, no one's being pressured into it. It's just more just lack of creativity, lack of wanting to change, security thinking, you know, which is linked to fear. But I think that, you know, there's this great book, I haven't read it, but it's called The Sovereign Individual, which I think was written like 10 years ago. But he outlined everything that's happening and how we're reaching this new information age. So it's like the industrial age to the information age. So you guys have made the jump, you know, because you're in the information era, doing podcasts and getting your work out there like that. But I see a lot of people who are more attached to this old world as well. And that's going to have to go. Like the education systems, you need a job to go there, you know. All of these Saturnian systems, is legacy media, legacy mainstream medicine, like these are all collapsing, you know. And to the extent that we find security in that old world is to the extent that we're going to hang on to it as it dies. It's like literally like being on a ship that's sinking, actually. And Dane Rudger actually has this really great quote that people can look up. It's called The Seed People. And he really talks about how, you know, this transitionary era that we're in, which we speak to a lot in our work. And he says this one line, that you can either identify with the dying world, or you can identify with the seed of the new world that wants to birth itself, you know. And I see a lot of people actually identifying with the dying world and wanting to kind of fix the government, fix the system or whatever. It's like, no, this is like actually sinking, and there's something new being created, you know. And there is alternative communities going. Like, I don't know how you guys feel about crypto. I think that's going to be a part of it. I know many people have different opinions, but it's just, it gives the power back to the people, you know. So that's this kind of theme, is like, I always, like, when I think about the Aquarius theme, I was like, is it giving the power back to the people, you know? And the internet gave the power back to the people as well. And so I think there's a tremendous opportunity for entrepreneurship to make changes, you know. But it's like, are you willing to make those changes? Are you willing to die and be reborn, basically?
That's what it comes down to. And, you know, you said something, I shared a post about it the other day. I said, like, people keep saying, well, you know, they had to, and well, my friend had to, and I actually had to do this thing. And I was like, you don't, you know, it just depends. Like, how willing are you to be uncomfortable? You know, what are your priorities? Like, I tell people now, okay, in my position, you know, we're in a good space right now, but I tell my friends, like, I'd fucking live in a hut in the jungle somewhere if I had to. Like, there's no way. I just know myself. Like, there's no way I would do it at all.
Yeah, they would actually have to come to my door and force it into me. And even even if they did that and the jab killed me, I would try and reincarnate as a Pluto and Aquarius person, which would be a revolutionary template. And I would go back and like grow up and start like the revolution again, you know. It's like, there's no avoiding this. There's no avoiding the process. There's no avoiding the hard decisions that need to be made, you know. But it's really about like who still identifies with the consensus state, you know. I gave that up. I have Uranus actually on my south node, so I see through my life, I never was, it was actually a struggle for me to be part of the mainstream. I was like, what the hell, this is garbage. Why would I want to be part of this world? You know, I rejected it early on, but I see a lot of people actually still putting faith in it. You know, they just have so much attachment to the way things were, you know. And I think that if you're willing to kind of tune in your consciousness to the future that's wanting to pull us forward, that can be also a big point of inspiration, you know, because like, it's amazing to live in these times. It's crazy, but there's so much opportunity as well, you know, like it was never this easy to really work for yourself and build your own business as it is now and reach people all over the world. Like, we literally work with people all over the world, and that's amazing to see people unite in this way. So it's exciting. It's really exciting, but, you know, again, it's like we got to choose what we put our attention on, you know. And I think a lot of people are avoiding self-actualizing by kind of being stuck on the screen and consuming information, you know. Whereas if you spend like an hour a day on something that you're passionate about, that you can get paid for, you could literally change your career in like 3 months if you wanted to. Like, that's the truth. I know, because I went through that. I'm sure you guys went through that with your own coaching, you know, like it's easy to change your life if you want to.
Absolutely. The ground has never been more fertile for you to create a life that is more authentically in alignment with who you are. And I think that that's the opportunity that we have now, is that, you know, I mean, for so long we've been prolonged within these inauthentic systems, in these routines and these habits, and working for people that, you know, I mean, they don't serve us on any kind of level. And now it's kind of like, as this is collapsing, there was kind of like just this opportunity that came by for you to actually make a new decision, make a new choice, decide what it is that I can actually offer and how I can actually be of service. What do I need to learn to be able to step into that? Because part of this as well is most of the officiaries have gone out the window. You don't need to be a doctor, and then didn't have any of the titles anymore either. You know what I mean? And there's so many people who are craving these kind of services too. But it's just about finding what your offer is at the same time, and actually acting upon that, putting work towards building something. But often people are so resistant to build something new, and there's always the too hard kind of aspect of it as well, you know. But that's a rite of passage in itself.
Yeah, the will has to be there, you know. I'm studying a new method, a psychospiritual modality of therapy by this guy who is like a contemporary of Jung, and as well as Dane Rudhyar, who I mentioned earlier, the astrologer. And he really talks about the importance of the will on the path, you know, the will to just do something. It first begins with your personal will. Like, you know what stuff needs to be done. Are you going to do it or not? Like, that's really what it comes down to. And I see that a lot of people, you know, that's the central thing that makes progress on the path, is like, is the will to do it there? Some people learn that will through desperation. Some people have that will in them already, you know, especially more creative types. But like, the will needs to be engaged. You know, you need the will to like even just read a book for an hour and not go to social media, you know, like these days, like our attention is such a precious commodity, you know. And I think with a lot of people, you know, if the will isn't there, they just float along through life. They wake up, they check their phone for 3 hours, they just kind of, you know, and I can see how that can be also a trauma response in these times, you know. But the will to make a different life has to be there. And I know for me it was, because I was like, I was not doing well in the matrix world. I went to college, I went to kind of my job placement after college, and I was like, I can't do this. This is going to suck my life force. And I had to create my life from nothing. You know, I was like, okay, what do I want to do? What do I care about? It was like just step by step moving towards my passion, and my path unfolded, you know. But the will to make something different was always there. And I think with many people is that will doesn't sometimes, I guess, switch on unless they're in a highly pressurized environment, you know. And I think if we can just kind of engage a little bit of that fire on a day-to-day basis, we can make rapid changes in our own spiritual evolution and our own physical evolution, recreating our lives, you know. But the will has to be there.
Yeah, and it's really what I found. It's actually a spiritual process in itself. You know, it's not always just internalizing everything. Actually, exerting yourself in the world and moving forward is a catalyst for real growth and change. I mean, obviously, and it works both ways. You know, as you meet the world, so you meet yourself. The further you extend out, the more the deeper you can go. The more things that are gonna be there to be resolved, to actually create the space necessary for you to then move on to the next level. And we're not here to be stagnant beings on any level. We're human, right? We're here to act. We're here to do. We're here to even achieve, right? And people have almost like negated and neglected and turned achievement into some kind of dirty concept. where it's not at all. And this all comes down to the Marxist and the socialist programming, but really, I mean, if you understand the work of individualism and Ayn Rand and true capitalism and forms like this, then these are actually life-giving processes. Man is here to do something. Man is here to test his mettle on some level. And this will has been diminished within us so deeply. And this is, again, part of the reason why we're so prone to having these tyrannical forces just implement themselves upon us. So if anything, we're being taught a lesson in exerting our will and actually tapping back into that as a collective as well.
Yeah, and that's also, so when you think about basically the basic premise of evolutionary astrology, that whenever you're working with an archetype, so Aquarius in this instance, you're also working with the opposite archetype. So Leo is actually the opposite of Aquarius. And so the Leo signature actually fuels kind of the Aquarius times we're entering into, which means that creative self-actualization in service to humanity is going to be a huge lesson for us, And actually, I read a quote by Maslow. He literally said that 1% of the population is self-actualized, which is alarming. It's like that. So that's 99% of people are not living out the purpose they were here to be. And I believe that, actually, maybe a little bit more, but I believe that, because when I think the thing with coaching is, and I think this is kind of the gift that I offer people, is I do see the infinite potential in people. I do see that they can be anything, even when they can't see it themselves, because we've really been programmed and really disempowered by the consensus culture that, okay, you're basically a slave from the moment you are born, and then you have to go to university and become even more of a slave and go into hundreds of thousands of debt and then become more of a slave to your debt. Like, we live in this slave mindset in many ways, just waiting for someone to give us a job and pay us. It's like, no, create your own job, get paid yourself. Like, this is like, the creative potential we have available for us in this era, and I think that a lot of people, and that's actually why we incorporate evolutionary astrology in the course, is because I just want people to realize why they came here, who they are, and have the will to carry out that mission. You don't need to be perfect. You don't need to be the best. Just have the will to be who you are and do what you came here to be here for, and it's easier said than done, because the first thing you come up against is all of those limitations, all of this programming. So I think that the creative self-actualization is so key right now too. And that's why I think generally creative people are able to make the jump into the information age easier, because they're like, okay, how do I do this? How do I make a course? How do I become a coach? Like, they figure it out, right? There's a certain type of person who seems to make that jump to entrepreneur, the kind of entrepreneur lifestyle. And I think that we need to actually become entrepreneurs as well. Like, I would love to see all the nurses and doctors set up their own alternative health movements as well. So we'll see.
Beautifully said. Laura, I'm going to wrap this one up. Anything that you want to share with our audience? Any of your courses starting again, or where can people find you, and what's the process for that?
Yeah, so I think we have 8 spots next for our group coaching program, which starts in January. And that's a 12-week group program in psychospiritual self-work hosted by Bernhard and I. We do weekly calls. We engage people through a process of what we call holistic self-work. So working on all levels: emotional, psychological, spiritual, somatic. So we have one more coming up in January. And if you want to apply to that, you can go or find out more about it. You can go to Bernhard's website at veilofreality.com. And then we're going to actually take a little bit of a break, because we've been going hard with groups actually. And then in the meantime, the best way to find me is through social media. As long as I'm not deleted, I'm on Instagram under Laura Matsue. We also have a Cosmic Matrix podcast, which has gotten really popular. So you can look up Cosmic Matrix on any podcast provider. And yeah, I think that's it. I'm not really going to get my website because I don't update it, but the best way to find me is, and Telegram too. So we have a Time of Transition Telegram channel, which you can either find, I don't know if you guys can link it, but I also have it linked on my bio on Instagram.
Yeah, we'll have all the links below.
Okay, cool. Yeah. The best way to find us censorship free is Telegram these days, for sure.
Awesome. Guys, definitely check out Laura and check out Bernard as well. These guys have been really presenting the work in a grounded way which I think is super beneficial for everyone. I know that just consuming their information in my own way is something that has definitely helped me along my path, certainly, and people that I definitely recommend you following and getting in touch with. Laura, thank you so much for making the time to join us today, and thank you for being here for the truth.
Thank you for having me.
Take care, guys. Bye.
Smoking mirrors, I'm seeing through the illusion. Waking up in a time, they think you're in a delusion. Somebody set the alarms, cause they be too busy snoozing. I'm in a DeLorean.